Welcome to the World Physiotherapy Education Task Force webinar series. This is the fourth webinar, Fostering Good Mental Health of Students and Educators During the Pandemic. My name is Nina Rydland Olsen. I am an Associate Professor and Program Director of Master in Science and Evidence-Based Practice at Western Norway University of Applied Sciences. Today, together with Barbara Sanders, who is Professor of Physical Therapy and Chair of the Department of Physical Therapy at Texas State University, we will be moderating this session. First, just a few words about the World Physiotherapy COVID-19 Education Task Force. The aims of the Education Task Force is to consider the impact, consequences, and responses to COVID-19 in physiotherapist entry-level education with short, medium, and long views in mind. The task force also aims to map and share best educational practice and resources in responding to the current crisis. And the task force aims to consider questions and opportunities for collaborative scholarship and thought leadership. So, we have designed this webinar series for World Physiotherapy member organizations, physiotherapist educators, regulators, student physiotherapists, and clinical educators. Welcome to you all. Before we start today's webinar, I will share with you some housekeeping information. So Rachel, if you could put the next slide up, please. Microphones and cameras of webinar attendees are automatically switched off. We encourage you to ask questions at any time during the webinar by using Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can pose questions to specific panelists by indicating their name at the beginning of your question or pose a question for all. We will also monitor the chat during this webinar. Panelists will be answering your questions in a moderated Q&A session after all presentations are completed. If we run out of time, panelists will answer remaining questions in the World Physiotherapy Facebook group network for physiotherapist educators. If you experience any problems during the webinar, please email them to us at info@worldphysio. Before we move to the presentations of our panelists, we will open a poll now to find out a bit more about who is in this audience. Please answer the questions when they appear at your screen. So perhaps, Rachel, if you can help me to put them up on the screen. So, while you all take some minutes to answer the poll, I will briefly introduce the topic of today. It has been said that COVID-19 situation could produce similar effects as other large-scale disasters due to the sudden and huge changes that we have experienced in our lives, in particular the social distancing. It seems that there is still little research on today's topic, although there is evidence that students' mental health during the pandemic is at high risk. For example, excessive screen time during COVID-19 has been shown to have negative impact on students' mental and physical health. There is also evidence that university students experience extremely high stress and anxiety, and some even need professional help to cope. Clearly, it is extremely important to address today's topic. So I think that we are having some results now from the poll that I will share with you. As you can see, there is a high rate of participants coming from the Asia Western Pacific, about 59% of you. And we have about 14% of participants coming from Europe and 20% from North America, Caribbean, and about 7% from South America. And it also seems that most of the educational institutions that are here today deliver their physiotherapy education program mainly online. although there is also about 30% who says that there is a combination of online and on-campus teaching. So I think we can stop sharing the results. In this webinar, we have two distinguished panelists who will be talking about their experiences of online learning during the pandemic. Oh, no, not on online learning, but on mental health. Unfortunately, Tshering Norbu from Bhutan could not join us as a presenter due to the deteriorating situation with the pandemic in his country and his involvement in the pandemic response. Our first speaker today, I'd like to introduce her, is Norma Elisa Galves Olvera from Mexico. She has been teaching in bachelor degree program in physiotherapy since 1994. She is also a coordinator of the physiotherapy course in mental health. Elisa has a bachelor degree in physical therapy from the School of Physical and Occupational Therapists. She has a master's degree in educational awareness in Gestalt orientation and a postgraduate diploma in basic body awareness methodology. She has 31 years of experience in the treatment of patients with rheumatic diseases, orthopedics, geriatrics, and mental health, as well as experience in group management in physiotherapy and psychotherapy. Elisa has worked with groups of seniors in health centers and has experience in psychotherapeutic work with the Mexican Association of Support and Fight Against Scleroderma, working as psychotherapist and independent physiotherapist since 2000. Elisa is a president and founding member of the Mexican Association of Physiotherapy in Mental Health, the representative for Mexico at the International Organization of Physical Therapy in Mental Health, and the founding member of the American Network of Physiotherapy in Mental Health. So I will then hand it over to you, Elisa. And if I miss something, you can, of course, add something. Please, Elisa.
Thanks, Nina, for introducing me. First of all, I appreciate the World Physiotherapy for the invitation to participate in this webinar. For me, it's important to contextualize. Mexico has 32 cities and 200 physiotherapy degree programs, both public and private. In my country, the population is 126 million. From this, 30.6 corresponds to young people between 15 and 29 years old. That is 25.7% of the population. An important impact that the pandemic has had on education is that it has further aggravated inequalities. The closing of schools affected millions of students of all age. According to the WHO, almost 24 million students from basic to university education who drop out schools due to the economic impact of this health crisis. In Mexico, the UNAM, the biggest and more important public university, estimates that 20% of the population of students could drop out of their studies. I am going to present a little bit about what has been done in Mexico. In the universities, there are areas of university accompaniment, psychology, mental health, and psychiatric services, depending on the university. These provided services to students. If you enter to the web page university, you will be able to see all they are offered to these departments. What has been seen is an increase in requests for attention. Normally, there are more requests at the beginning or end of the semester when students are more stressed about their academic performance. In this sense, the demand was more focused on undergraduate students. This increase in requests during quarantine was due to emotional states such as anxiety, sadness, depression, or violence within the family nucleus where interpersonal relationships are strained by confinement, uncertainty, and gender violence. At this point, strategies were promoted to stimulate dialogue between academics and students in order to build actions against gender violence. For example, the realization of virtual seminars, research and teaching in times of pandemic, a reflection with gender's perspective, in which the impact of the pandemic in confinement was analyzed. At university, the physical and emotional health of students, academic and administrative population is contemplated in the institutional plan working. At the beginning of the quarantine, the psychologists had to modify their attention, which became online. A 24-hour emergency hotline was offered to deal with this critical situation. In the middle of the confinement, they continue working based on protocols or lines of care that are disseminated to the students and the community on social networks. In this way, any student can make a request by providing their information, and they are contacted by someone in the area giving them a virtual appointment. If they don't have internet access, they will be contacted by phone. They who suffer abuse, depression, violence, or suicide attempts have been followed up. Campaigns and webinars were carried out to promote emotional health, suicide prevention, emotions, anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, which it has been the most presented, and talks about the stress management posture for all the hours they are in front of the screen, addiction, eating disorders, since many had anxiety and began to overeat. Here, physical therapy in mental health could play a very important role with breathing techniques, relaxation, conscious movement, exercise, and health education. This work was carried out at some universities, but by some physiotherapists. Regarding physical activity and for the university community and society in general, there have been some contents developed for their physical and mental care. At the UNAM, they held a 48 hours hackathon, building the new normality, in order to get solutions to the pandemic. 400 students from 26 different degrees proposed creative solutions facing the pandemic, covering the categories of health, economy, transport, and education. There was also communication through different media opinion articles written by professors about interesting topics for the population about the pandemic, and infographics in relation to different health issues. This is an example carried out by the National College of Physiotherapy. There were also radio shows and interviews to researchers in medicine and humanities about different topics. For example, the National College of Physiotherapy had a series of webinars named Stay Home, where we spoke about the importance of physiotherapy in mental health, respiratory physiotherapy, among others. The subgroup of mental health had a virtual congress, which allowed us the exchange of experience between professors and important researchers from different parts of the world. We had 120 participants, of which 50% were foreigners. With the American Network of Physiotherapy in Mental Health, we had some webinars about different topics. We also had talks about how each country was facing the pandemic, and we were able to collaborate between us in workshops and webinars. In the first webinar that we had, the name was Let's Drink a Coffee with the American Network. We had 800 attendees. In relation to teaching dynamics, the biggest challenge was to change from in situ teaching to online teaching, whether it was synchronous or asynchronous, and for many teachers, it was very stressful. The confinement was implemented halfway through the ongoing semester on March 20. Since then, the schools have been closed. And although the teachers already knew their students, they had to adapt everything to an online setting in a weekend and without knowing for how long. So besides dealing with their own feelings towards the difficult situation, they had to learn how to teach online, along with all the digital resources some of them have never used before, and along with the technical issues like a strong internet connection and a working computer. It was a difficult process that no one was sure on the best way to proceed, and different schools handled the situation the best they could under such circumstances. And thus there were infinite solutions. I will give you an example. As the practical sessions were suspended, according to the topic, the students were asked to look for a relative who had an illness or a physical problem and develop a proposal of treatment, follow the patient and give treatment and present evidence, for example, with videos. And here the teacher's creativity have played an important role. Talking about challenge, some students don't like their cameras on because they feel that they lost intimacy, or everybody could hear when the father screams or the mother is cleaning the house, the brother fights, the cat crows in front of the camera. Then these situations provoked a lot of stress, and the students had a lot of distractors. Then many teachers decided to be more flexible with the evaluations. Starting the new semester and school year online, what we could see was for the younger teachers, was relatively easier because they developed techniques with more technological tools. For the older, the effort was bigger because of the technological knowledge and equipment. In this case, some universities supported them with an extra bonus to improve their PC or lend them some equipment. Some even helped the students. Giving another example, at the UNAM, many older teachers decided to retire, which let us infer that the challenge was too big for them. On the other hand, teaching face-to-face is easier to keep track of the students and now the group, which allows the teacher to adapt, adjust the rhythm, adjust the class, the rhythm and content, and now how students are doing in general. This is very difficult online because it's not easy keeping track of everyone, especially if they have their cameras off. This obstructs the teacher learning process. Also, the students' accompaniment was important when they started being in crisis because a relative had gotten the disease or passed away, or when one of the parents lost their job of their means to getting money, and some had to quit studying to get a job. This allowed teachers give a follow-up and suggest students to visit the psychology or psychiatry department, but many of these services were saturated. Regarding how safe spaces were created, as teachers know their students, at this point, they give the entrance to the platform, which allows greater security. And something else to comment is that most teachers in Mexico also treat patients either in hospitals or private clinics. When suddenly everything closed, for example, my patients were very anxious, and so I decided to form a group by Zoom, and I have been working with them, physiotherapy and mental health, with very good results. Then to summarize, this is some actions that have been done in Mexico, And many of them are the same that have been done in Latin American countries. Just before finishing, I would like to highlight that first, we must take care of our mental care, of our mental health. In this way, we can help our students or community if we know and recognize the symptoms that require psychological or psychiatric support. And as we are living in difficult times, we can be empathetic, flexible, and accompany them in this difficult moment. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Elisa, for this interesting and good presentation. I will now hand it over to Emmanuel, but I will first introduce him. He's our second speaker, Emanuel Brunner. Emmanuel, he graduated from Zurich University of Applied Sciences in 2010. In 2012, he completed the Master of Rehabilitation Sciences and Physiotherapy at Leuven, Belgium, with the major in Rehabilitation in Mental Health Care. Back in Switzerland in 2012, he started working as a clinical physiotherapist at the Kantonsspital Winterthur. Since then, he has been consulting patients with complex chronic pain problems and mental illness at Kantonsspital Winterthur. Additionally, Emmanuel has started working as a lecturer in physiotherapy. In 2018, he completed his PhD also at Leuven under supervision of Professor Michael Probst and Professor Wim Dankerts. His research focuses on the management of psychological factors associated with chronic low back pain. In January 2020, he took a new position as a lecturer in physiotherapy at the Eastern University of Applied Sciences in St. Gallen, Switzerland. In this role, he is responsible for the development of a new Bachelor of Physiotherapy. Since 2018, Emmanuel has been Treasurer of the International Organization of Physical Therapy in Mental Health. This is a subgroup of World Physiotherapy. He is also a member of the Swiss Organization for Physiotherapy in Psychomatics and Psychiatry. Emmanuel, then I hand it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. And thanks to World Physiotherapy for the kind invitation to this web seminar. Dear colleagues, I welcome you to my presentation on the Swiss perspective for physiotherapy education during the Corona pandemic. First, before I focus on the Swiss situation, I would like to spend some words on the International Organization of Physiotherapy in Mental Health, because I think it's important in this context that all know about the existence of our group. We are a recognized subgroup of World Physiotherapy since 2011. At the moment, we have 22 member countries around the world, and we are looking forward to welcome 2 new members in this year. So that's the IOPTMH. Then maybe also in this context, it's important to highlight that we are about to publish the education standards of the IOPTMH. That's a document describing the minimal requirements of mental health courses in physiotherapy education. So the general objectives of these documents are to describe the roles of physiotherapists in mental health, but also the different levels of competences that students should achieve on the different levels of physiotherapy education. So basic entry-level education and the more advanced educational programs. The plan is that we publish the education standards during the general meeting this year. And then we would like to invite you to contact us from the IOPTMH. You can contact all the members of the executive committee, but especially Michel Probst, our president. He has been involved, or he has been responsible for the development of this document over the last couple of months. So, Swiss perspective, I think that's maybe valid for all countries. Here in the graph, you see the total number of positive cases. So at the beginning of last year in May, we had the increase in numbers, and then you see that the situation was rather stable during the summer. And then at the end of October, it increased. And since then, we are still see an increase in the numbers. And I would say the situation in Switzerland is still quite tricky. It's difficult. So the healthcare system can cope with the high demands they have. So the situation is under control, but the situation is rather difficult. What does it mean for physiotherapy education? In general, it's rather confusing because Switzerland is a complicated country. We have different regulations in all different parts of the country, so it's difficult to generalize. But overall, I would say that all lectures are in digital teaching mode now. So we have some special exceptions for practical courses. But here it's also unclear. We have unclear regulations. We are not allowed to provide all practical courses on the campus. But surely, and that's maybe for the students, a very important aspect is that they are not allowed to do any self-study on the campus. And that has been very common in my country, that the students enter the campus for exercising the practical skills. And that's not allowed at the moment. And then, especially in this time, in January, we are now having the exams. It was for a very long time, it was unclear how we can do the exams. And that had especially consequences for the educators. So the educators, I think most of us, they have experienced that we sit in an empty room. But it was also a challenge that we saw a very sudden shift to digital education. So maybe in the last years, digital education has become more important, but the change to a complete shift to a digital education posed a challenge for the educators. It was related with a high workload. It's the fact that we had to shift all the content to digital platforms cost a lot of work for the lecturers. Then we had the technical challenge that it was particularly at the beginning. We also recognized that it was difficult for the students because all the educators, they use different communication channels. So some they communicated via Zoom, others via Teams, others preferred emails, and so that was very difficult. And it was quite an intensive time to develop the strategies for the digital teaching. Then also a lot of my colleagues, or many of my colleagues, they were afraid of doubled workload, particularly because of exams, due to the unclear regulations and or the legal situation with the exams. Some were afraid that they have to develop two different versions of the exams, so that also caused a lot of stress for the educators. But most important, I think, is that many of my colleagues, they also described what I experienced, that they missed the interaction with the students, because that's the fact, or maybe the main motivation of the lecturers, that we do our job because of the interaction with students. And just a colleague in my office, she stated very nicely before Christmas that, damn, I'm not a radio host, I'm a lecturer. I don't like to talk with a screen, with a microphone. So, and now I would like to focus on the students, and I'm going to present you some highlights from a study which was conducted by my colleagues here at the University in St. Gallen. We do have the results from 1,000 students. So these are not physiotherapy students, but I think it could be useful to give an overall impression about the situation of students in my country. The topics were the changes in students' motivation and confidence before and during lockdown, and then also relationships between potential challenge and the motivation and confidence of students. It was a cross-sectional study, so we may have to be careful with conclusions because students were asked to report retrospectively how the motivation and confidence was before the pandemic and during the pandemic. But at least despite this limitation, I think it could be worth it to have a look at the results. So here you see the change in motivation and confidence with different topics. We have enjoyment, support, then the demands, how I cope well with the demands in my studies, then the exams and work life. And you see that in all different domains that that the self-reported experience of these domains decreased. But I think in the context of mental health and emotional well-being, I think it's interesting, or most interesting, that the biggest change or difference was regarding demands. And that's probably related with the self-efficacy of students, that they do not feel confident to cope with the challenges of their studies. And another aspect also, maybe I think that's interesting, the question to students in the current situation, what is particularly challenging for me is that we have distraction and tasks, and that's probably related with each other, that almost 80% of the students state that the distraction is a main concern that they have, but then also worry and loneliness, that more than half of the students report that they are worried about their loneliness or that they worry in general. But maybe also, so here we have the emotional challenge, but maybe also important, that's maybe the European or Central European situation, that our students, that seems that the infrastructure is not a main concern of them. So it seems that they have the technology and the workplace to study, or most of them. So in summary, the COVID-19 pandemic seems to have a negative impact on students' motivation and confidence. I think that's not a big surprise, otherwise we would not have this webinar. And distraction was identified as potential main concern of students. And then in my country, that's mainly about the emotional challenges. So innovations to foster mental health in Switzerland. When I look around my country, then I have to state that there are almost no specific offers to students in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. You do see some special offers or special strategies at large universities, but not at the universities of applied sciences where the physiotherapy study programs are situated. So that's maybe also related with the question of resources or or innovation of these different institutions. I think there are two interesting approaches here in Switzerland, but I really think they are not appropriate to the size of the challenge that we are confronted with. But for example, the University of Zurich, they established an online platform for self-help, but there is no chance for interaction for students, for example. It's just written information for students. And then a bit further elaborated, I think, is the offer from Bern. They provide tips for coping with isolation and digital education. So the self-help platform is very general about the challenge, not related specifically with the COVID-19 pandemic. And the offer in Bern is has been specifically developed for COVID-19. So now my personal ideas for fostering good health. I don't have a solution, but when I thought about the questions, I think it would be very important to offer tips or advices for students for self-study during the digital teaching, about media consumption, because that might be strongly related with distraction. Then time management, daily routine, sleep, diet, I think that has become very important during the last couple of months. Then highlighting the importance of physical activity. That's maybe not a surprise for physiotherapy students, but surely also for the other students. And then also tips for stress and anxiety management. Then I think it's worth it to think about peer support. I recognize a program in Belgium, for example, that they have a main-mate program that the students can interact with each other, and also that they can offer support for others. But then surely we also have to think about professional support for those who really need psychological counseling or other mental health workforce for more severe crises. So for physiotherapy education, what does it mean? I think a very big challenge and something that concerns me a little bit is the question about how we develop the communication skills and all the skills that are needed for fostering strong therapeutic alliances in clinical practice. I think that's very difficult with only digital teaching. Then also the same with self-study, the question how students practice their practical skills, or especially the hands-on skills. But then we also have challenges in the clinical placements because some institutions, they have reduced services. and yeah, may also influence the students. But there are surely also opportunities. I think it should be used or it should stimulate self-reflection, particularly for students or physiotherapists working in the field of mental health. It's also an opportunity to self-reflect about stress responses, motivation, or processes of behavior change. I think that's something that should be used or could be beneficial for physiotherapy education. But then also maybe for lectures in physiotherapy, it's also a chance to optimize for the automation of repetitive tasks. If we manage it now to develop good video tutorials, for example, then maybe we can also make the education more efficient. I think that's also a possible advantage. What do the educators need? I think we have to talk about resources in the long run. It has surely not been the time in the first months, but I think in the long run, we need other resources. Or don't think that we just need more, but maybe we have to think about how we spend the resources. Then technical support, surely the infrastructure, that the educators get the equipment to do digital teaching on high level. But then I also think that we need a long-term strategy, because I don't think that the pandemic will be over in the next couple of days or weeks. So, and very stressful for the educators is the fact that you don't know what will be in a couple of weeks or months. So this uncertainty, that's surely something that should be tackled in the last months. And overall, I think in general, the educators, they should probably receive more attention, because in the first run, it was relevant for the institutions to fulfill the curriculum, to care for the well-being of the students. But in that period, I recognized a little bit a lack of attention for the lecturers. I think that's something that we are all responsible for. I'd like to thank you for your attention. In summary, I think I send you best regards from Switzerland. I don't think that you can learn a lot from my country about the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah, but we still think that we have the best chocolate. And even if it's not a solution, I think it's good for the emotional well-being to consume good and high quality Swiss chocolate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. It would have been great if we could share some chocolate here, I guess. Yeah. Then it's time for the Q&As and perhaps some questions in the chat. Do we have anything in the Q&A?
Yes, we have. The first question is that that the conditions of COVID have really demonstrated the disparity of conditions of students. The social inequities has generated the situation of suicide attempt, learning to manage death of family and friends, that loneliness and fear. I think both of you related to that. Do either of you have suggestions on how we deal with that with our students? Elisa or Emmanuel, either one of you? Nina?
Perhaps we should ask Emmanuel or Elisa first, I don't know.
Yeah, I fully agree. It's just, for me, difficult. I'm from the Swiss context. It's a very liberal country, and I think that's also something that you now see a little bit, that the institutions still strongly believe, I think, in the end, that the students are self-responsible for their mental health and the well-being. So they are not really involved, or they don't feel that much responsible for the emotional well-being of the students. And yeah. So I do not have suggestions, because you don't see good examples in my country in that context.
Thanks,
but
Emmanuel.
I do see the problems. Yeah.
Thank you. Elisa, comments?
I think that one important thing that we can do as educators should be educating in emotional states, because many of the students, from my point of view, I think that many people believe that violence is as something natural. For the context where I live, many students suffer violence in different situations. For example, in the family or in the place where they live. Then I think that first we must teach them that violence is not the normal, that violence is not the thing that they must live. Then they must recognize what is violence, what is depression, what is different emotional states. If they can recognize them, then I think they can know when they are suffering violence, or when they feel anxiety, or when they feel sad, because for many of them, they don't know what they are feeling. Then I think it is important to speak about that with our students. When I prepared the webinar, when I was preparing my presentation, I asked to many of my colleagues that are working in different universities how they were coping with this situation. And the majority of them told me that the students were very stressed, they feel depression, they feel anxiety, they feel a lot of emotional states. And then they sent to the psychologists or the psychiatric services. And as I said before, they were saturated. Then I think it's good to maybe to make webinars about emotions and about all these kind of topics. And then in that way, they can understand what are the emotions and how they are feeling. What they are feeling, they can recognize what they are feeling.
Yeah, maybe just that's what I mentioned with the chances of going into self-reflection, that maybe you could work with a diary, for example, that actually what we do with our patients to recognize or to note what's going on emotionally or on the cognitive level, but also the behavior and the bodily reactions. I think that's something that we could stimulate as educators. That's something that's surely useful for the future clinical practice of the students.
Is it part of, so can I just say something, Bob? Or
Sure.
yeah,
No, go ahead,
I was
Nina.
just wondering if it's a part of curriculum in any of your educational institution, Elisa or Emmanuel, like stimulating self-reflection or focusing on mental health. Is it part of your teaching or for on their own behalf, on students' behalf?
No, in our curriculum, we are about to develop it, but it's in the context of behavior change that they have to report the different processes of behavior change. I think that's a topic that could also be strengthened now during the COVID pandemic. And then we try to stimulate that during the mental health sessions when it's about stress reactions and all the psychosomatic topics.
In my country, it's not included too. I think now many things will change, because now we are looking the problem, and then we have had many discussions about this topic, but now it's not included.
I think that, and I'd like to just comment a little bit, and Nina, I would like to get your response, and then I have another comment from one of our participants. One of the things that has contributed to this in our country, in the United States, has certainly been the civil unrest that occurred simultaneously with the COVID pandemic. And that's brought about even more reflection on the disparity and the inequities in healthcare. And so I think that our programs, I'm not sure that there's an organized national achievement, but I know all of my colleagues are much more in tune to the issues with their students and trying to use this as an opportunity to teach all of the students, as well as the faculty and some of our consumers about the long-term impact, not just of COVID on healthcare disparities, but also on of other diseases. And it's been particularly important to check in on the mental health of those students. And so I would like to comment. Emma Stokes has commented in our discussions about how important it is to both with faculty and students to do the regular check-ins, to be sure that we're doing what we need to do to provide them with support. And I think Emmanuel and Elisa, you were saying the same thing, is, you know, we need to know where they're coming from and what the resources are they need, and to try to do the best that we can. And I know that's important both with faculty and with staff. Nina?
Well, I agree. This is very essential, and we don't have anything similar in Norway either. We do check in with our students regularly to evaluate courses that we do, but I don't think it's been a main focus to check on their mental health. And I think it would be nice to have some like helpful tips or guidance on how to do this in the best way, because one thing is checking in, the other thing is how do you handle it if they have problems, and where do you pass them on to? So I don't know, perhaps Emma, if you wanted to comment more on.
Did you want? Yeah, thanks, Nina. Yeah, look, I mean, I'm really lucky. I bridge two communities at this point. I'm working at Qatar University, setting up a startup program, which is filled with the challenges of a startup program, and then a startup program in a pandemic. Which, you know, has been really interesting. And then I also, obviously, I'm on leave from Trinity College in Dublin, and so I see a lot of what's going on there as well, and I'm in touch with my colleagues there. I guess from a very explicit perspective, we have been lucky in that we focus on things like emotional intelligence in some of our professional issues courses. We do an enormous amount of reflective writing anyway as part of our course. This was before the pandemic. And I think what's been really interesting is our students also take a course on health coaching and coaching one another. And looking at their writing, you can start to see how, you know, we're in working with them to start developing health behavior change strategies and empowering those in patients, how they've started to look at those in their own lives. And we would focus on self-compassion. And there's some great work by Kirsten Neff, selfcompassion.org, which has got some really nice ways of looking at how we manage to be compassionate about ourselves. And we have covered that with our students before the pandemic, and I think it's even more important that we cover that now with them. But again, bringing in things like self-awareness, self-regulation, those were topics we covered before, not from a mental health perspective, just from a professional issues and practice perspective, but they've become more salient at this time, which has been really useful. Loads of fabulous free resources out there. I'm happy to share them with people on Twitter if anyone needs to just DM me.
It would be great if you share them on Facebook as well.
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. I'm happy to do that. I think what we've done as well is we have just checked in, and not that we've actually done anything. So with my faculty team, and I have a brilliant team of people who are absolutely fabulous and who've rolled up their sleeves and responded brilliantly, as I'm sure everyone's colleagues have. But I remember one day we were sitting around the table and we had done a check-in with the students on their sort of where they were. And then we did the same, I did the same check-in with the team, and we didn't need to do anything. We just needed to sit and acknowledge, you know, that this is hard and it's sad. And you know, people are sad about things. You know, a lot of my faculty were hoping to get home to their families at Christmas and, you know, on our winter break here, and they just weren't able to. And there wasn't anything we could do about it. But I think sitting and validating the sadness and validating the loss has been really important for all of us. And that there's nothing to do except sit with the people that you work with and just simply acknowledge it and say, you know what, yeah, this is hard.
Yeah, I think Emma, you're just highlighting the importance of that one-on-one communication, which Emmanuel, you found in your survey, is that loneliness and disconnectedness. Is we just have to take that additional extra step to be sure that we continue to try to connect and have the communication, even though it's not as intimate as we like, being in the same room, being able to give somebody a hug, or even make really good eye contact. I think just, as you mentioned, just connecting both with faculty and with students is critical. Emmanuel, there's another question here on the Q&A that asks, what place could the recognition of human interdependence have as a reason for this reflection?
Well, I think that's the basis of it. Huh? I think in physiotherapy education, I strongly believe that we have to focus more on self-reflection in general. I see it as very important that we reflect about how we react in different situations, how we are influenced by the context or the environment. But now in these days, also about the relationships or disconnectivity between, and that we reflect about what it makes with us. And yeah, so I see it as a very important aspect of the reflection, and maybe a topic that has not received so much attention in the past, because our students, they have not been affected by these issues, but our patients, they are, because loneliness has been a big challenge in healthcare for years already. And that maybe that's something that was hard to understand for students, and maybe that's also a learning point now for students, that they see that it, or that they can experience what it makes with humans if they are disconnected.
Thank you, Emmanuel. One of the other questions is, would panelists please share specific activities to support mental health for faculty and students? And I think that's what this conversation has basically been, are some important points. Are there other things that you would like to perhaps highlight or share that are specific activities that would support our faculty and our students?
Maybe just, as I mentioned, I do not have specific offers from Switzerland, from my country, but I do like the idea of peer support, that it's kind of coordinated by the faculties or the institutions. They try to support the students more proactively, that we try to establish networks for peer support. Yes, because I think those who have the tendency to be isolated, they are even more isolated, and maybe the faculties to have some responsibility to connect them with others. I think that's yeah. And then the general advices, but yeah, as I said, we have the Swiss chocolate, but not much more to offer at the moment.
Elisa.
I think that specific activities, it can be workshop about different kinds of exercise, because different people like different exercise. For example, it can be Zumba or dance or aerobic exercise. It can be conscious movement. It can be maybe basic body awareness therapy. It can be breathing techniques, relaxation techniques, maybe different kind of workshops that the students can attend and they can join. Because, for example, with the experience with my group, I have many teachers from the UNAM, and we were working for a lot of time, and they said, oh, this was as a kind of psychotherapy, but very, very soft, because when we meet, we say, hey, hello, how are you? What are you doing? And after we start to work, and many of them say, especially on Tuesday and Thursday, that it was when I have the sessions, they said, I was able to sleep better. Then I really joined this class. Then for me, that made me think that maybe we can do the same with the students. Mindfulness, something like that.
But maybe, I don't know what the others think, but in this time, I also rethink about the benefits of books. I mean, we are all complaining about screen time, and I self-experienced that I had to follow a course digitally, and the benefit was very much limited. So then I just thought, why don't they give me just a book that I can read? And maybe we also have to think about the resources that we use with our students. I think that should be time for some evaluation of that as well, I think, for the future.
I think the transition, we quickly felt like we had to pivot to that same kind of in-person learning. And so we automatically went to a lot of synchronous online Zoom meetings. And I think now one of the lessons we're learning is that we could use some of the asynchronous tools. Exactly, Emmanuel, reading assignments, discussion groups, things that take us out of that constant Zoom or whatever that technological platform is. It's a very good point. Emma's rejoined us. Nina, either of you want to make comments?
I would just say that one strategy has been around connection and being intentional about connections. And certainly, if anyone is on the call and is on Facebook, and I recognize that not everyone is, that there is a Facebook network, and I've had moments of significant anxiety where I've had a question, I just genuinely have not known the answer. 2 or 3 occasions where I've thought, I don't know what to do with this question from a faculty perspective. And to be able to put that question into the Facebook group and just say, does anyone have any information, or could anyone help me with this question? Because I just don't know where to go with it. And I think what's been fantastic is that for me has been a huge reassurance, because I have had immediate responses from people all over the world, some really, really helpful responses, just to help me out of that moment of panic where I've suddenly thought, somebody asked me how much PPE I needed to order back in July I was asked to order PPE in July and I was paralyzed. I didn't know how much PPE to order. I was thinking, where am I going to get the answer for that? And I was in a real sweat about it. I just put the question into the World Physiotherapy Facebook educators closed group, and felt comfortable asking it, felt like I didn't need to have the answer. And then everyone came back with their answers, and it was just great. So one of the things for me in terms of certainly managing my mental wellness has been being able to be in a group, a community of people who can help me in a way that no question is too foolish to ask. So for me, that's been, so finding your people has been a strategy that has been really helpful for me as a physiotherapist and as an academic. And so certainly for me, some of my people are in this Facebook network. And because it's closed, it feels safe. So that's, I guess, one strategy that I have found really helpful, and I don't know if anyone else will find it helpful, but I certainly have, and I'm very grateful to everyone for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. It's very good that you're promoting the Facebook group, and I think I agree, it's very useful, helpful. And Barbara, I know we are running a bit short of time, but perhaps I could just comment on this last one, because I think I just want to say that I agree with the speakers here and the panel that, peer support, perhaps what Emma was talking about now was among faculty. So perhaps this is not so easy for students as they don't meet physically. They don't, maybe they don't actually create the Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups or whatever they use of social channels as they used to. At least we have experienced that we have a whole cohort of students who didn't actually have a place where they connected. So perhaps we have more responsibility, and perhaps we need to push them to actually have these networks.
Great. Well, thank you all for your questions. I'm going to turn it back over to Nina to close us out.
Thank you. And then we have the last slide up as well. Thank you, Rachel. I just want to thank you all for taking time to participate in this webinar. A big thank to both of our speakers, and thanks to Bob for moderating this together with me. Since we have and for Emma for stepping in here also to joining the discussion. And since we have, there might be answers that we haven't managed, but I think we did most of them, didn't we, Bob?
Yes,
yeah?
We did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But if anyone has questions after the webinar, please ask them in the Facebook group, and you will find a link to it also at the internet on the World Physiotherapist webpage. And please post them here, and we will try to answer them after the webinar. And it would be great if more people could join this network. The recording of this webinar will also be posted in the World Physiotherapy COVID-19 Information Hub, education-based resources. On that same webpage, you will be able to find information about upcoming webinars. A feedback survey will also be sent to all attendees after this webinar. And this is the fourth in the series of 5 webinars, and we hope to see you again on February 8th at the same time as this webinar. And the topic will then be reimagining PT entry-level education, learning from COVID-19. We should all stay well and hope to see you on our next webinar. Thank you.